Okay, hi everybody. My name is Kristen Anton. I'm the New Tactics Online Community Builder, and this is our first official New Tactics Community Google Hangout, so we're really excited about this. This Hangout offers our community another way to connect with other practitioners so that they can share their knowledge and experience with each other. And this week on our website, we're hosting a conversation about working safely and effectively with human rights documentation tools. We're hosting this discussion in partnership with Heradox and Benetech. And this is part of a larger conversation series that's focused on seeking justice. So when we talk about human rights documentation in this context, we're talking about documenting human rights violations for the purpose of seeking justice. So today we're using this Google Hangout to discuss the topic, why is security important to human rights documentation? Hi, Enrique.
Hey, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
So, and I wanted to mention that this Hangout is going to be broadcast live. We're live right now, and it will be recorded on YouTube, and I'll be posting this recording to the New Tactics discussion on our website, so you'll be able to watch this later. So the first thing I wanted to do at this point is have Chris and Enrique introduce themselves and anyone else who is joining the call. If you could just share a little bit about your connection to human rights documentation, and then we'll start the discussion. So, Enrique, do you want to start?
Sure. Can you hear me well?
Yes, I can hear you great.
Hi, everyone. I'm Enrique Penas. I work for Benetech. I am the Vice President of the Human Rights Programs Order, and I work around, or I work at the intersection of human rights and technology, with particular emphasis on secure human rights documentation, information management, and data collection.
Great, thank you. And Chris, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. My name's Chris, and I handle all websites and technology needs for Iran Human Rights Documentation Center. So pretty much all computer systems within our internal network and external network, things like that.
Great, thanks. Oh, David. I see David is on the Hangout, but he doesn't have audio. Or maybe he can't hear us. David, could you try to introduce yourself? Oh, Enrique, can you hear David and I can't? Okay. David, if you want to just chat in a brief introduction about your work with human rights documentation, and then I could share that with the group. Okay. David's switching computers, so he might come back in a minute. Okay, well, thank you all for being on this Hangout. Let's start out by talking about the risks. In human rights documentation, what are the risks? Risks to the data, or actually risks to practitioners and vulnerable populations via the data. Enrique and Chris, what are some of the risks involved in human rights documentation?
Okay, well, I think, I mean, there's a lot of risks, and it could vary from person to person, and well, I think the whole thing with security is that thing. It's kind of like in everybody's life, like if you're crossing the street, for example, and there's not a crosswalk signal, but you need to kind of assess the situation and say, all right, what are the risks if I cross right now? Is there any cars coming? I might get hit by a car, you know, that kind of thing. So I think you have to look at the security of information kind of in the same way, depending on what it is. For example, you know, if it's a witness testimony, someone's come to you and is willing to share their story about what happened to them. This person's probably already traumatized, and you know, kind of making a risk even telling you. So it's your responsibility to keep their identity maybe private, so authorities, whatever authorities, don't find out, could make their life a lot worse. Mm-hmm. So I mean, it could get as bad as the person could be killed or imprisoned. So that always needs to be kept in mind by everybody on the team, I think, because not everyone has direct connection with these people. So sometimes you can become a little separated and maybe be like, oh, okay, maybe it's safe to keep this document just on my USB stick, and then you lose the USB. So yeah, you have to think of things like that and take precautions. And luckily here we have me who can do that for the other staff who maybe aren't as tech savvy.
Right.
So.
Okay. Christine, so in thinking of the risks around human rights documentation, I think it's important to, get a sense of, where does these human rights documentations happen, and in thinking of that, like in general, and this may be an oversimplification of the complexity of the human rights field, but I think it may be necessary to do something along those lines so we can move on with the rest of the topic. I think that in general, human rights documentarians are, agents of change through accountability and transparency efforts. And in that sense, it is impossible to remove them, from this change-making process that will generate resistance, right? So there will always be resistance to the action that they are performing, or the action, or the mandate that is behind this action, the overall change that they're trying to make. So this resistance to change, may come in different, with different strengths. We all tend to think, and we're right about doing so, around, the most immediate risk that documentation will bring, for the safety of that documentarian, for the safety of those whose data is being collected by a documentarian. But I think that it's important for us to understand, that risk is, something that is a bit more complex, and in that sense, is something that is not about, that data in transit or in storage today. Mm-hmm. It's about, a bunch of different other spaces, like including time and spaces. So in that sense, I think that what we need to think is the information that we collect, or that others collect, has information, it has data from vulnerable populations, it has evidence about our action, the action of the documentarian, and it has ethical implications for a topic, whatever that topic is. And again, I assume that this is a bit of a simplification, and it's a very particular and biased views, but I think it's important that we understand the risk in those three dimensions, especially because I think that historically we have skipped conversations around the responsibility about around the data of vulnerable populations, as well as the ethical responsibility or the ethical risk in terms of the way we manage information to a topic, to be mostly focused around the safety of documentarians, the physical safety, which is something that it's incredibly important, of course. But I think it's a good moment for us to expand this conversation. Let me make a pause there because I think that someone else just joined.
Yeah, Catalina, welcome. Could you introduce yourself very briefly to the group?
Okay, good morning, everyone. My name is Catalina. I'm from Guatemala, and I'm working in the National Police Archive. And my work here is, since several years, we are making statistics investigation using documents from my archive with HRDAC in the United States. And about this security topic, it's very important since the beginning. Like the people to talk before to me, we are thinking the security in two ways. The first way is the physical documents, because ours have sensitive information, and the second one is the data, what we do after we collect information, because we made samples for trying to respond big questions about what is the archive. And I think that is a brief.
Thank you. Right now we are talking about why security is important to human rights documentation. What is it about this kind of human rights work that requires this kind of extra layer of thoughtfulness and security around documentation efforts? I was wondering if you had anything that you wanted to share on that to start out with.
No, I am done.
Okay. Enrique, did you have anything else that you wanted to add at this point, or maybe we want to start to move on to these ethical principles that you touched on briefly?
Okay, yeah. Well, I would like to reiterate something that Carolina just mentioned, which I think is definitely important in the context of, general or traditional human rights documentation. And Carolina, please correct me if I understood this wrong, but I think that you're also speaking to the value of the preservation of archives. The value of the physical preservation of the original documents, where documentation starts, which is something that as we move closer to this digital era, and again, tongue-in-cheek, it's something that most of us that work on the techno-activist community start to forget, that not everything is being collected today with mobile devices, that not everything is collected via web pages, that there's a very long tradition in many areas of the world around documentation in paper-based forms, and that in many places, there are historical archives that are not just inaccessible, but are at risk of natural elements or human behavior. So I would like to highlight that point.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an important piece to include in this.
Can I say something?
Yes, please, Carolina.
Yes. Since the archive was discovered in 2005, that was the first thing everyone thought: rescue the documents. And the first thing we made was digital everything that we are doing right now too. And we put on the website for everyone can use the documents. But it's still important to preserve this document in original, especially for the court case, because they need to see the documents in original. And it's not the same to see in digital image. And I think we are in a special time right now. Like the documents are online, exist other kind of efforts have to be done trying to be safe the documentation online. I think I think are two separate worlds when we are using the word security. Yes, it's on.
Great. No, definitely very, very important. I agree. I put for those that are following the chat of this talk, I put 2 links that explain a little bit of the work that Carolina is referenced to, which is very, very important and groundbreaking work in Guatemala. So I have put 2 links there to the link from El Archivo, as well as a link from HRDAG.
Thank you very much. Yes.
Great. So I think that, I'm sorry, Christine, how do you want us to pursue the rest of the conversation?
Whatever you think is best, so go ahead.
So I don't know if it's too early to, depart completely from the conversation around digital security. So Chris, if you want me to come back to any of the points, I'm happy to do that. I'm just trying to elaborate based on some of the things that Carolina has mentioned, but it's not my exclusive focus. So one thing that I wanted to share with you in terms of like why security or why secure documentation is important is potentially with an example that comes from recent events. So on the one end, I think that we are all clear, or I hope we are all clear, that it's very important to protect, to expand the protection of human rights documentarian to the digital landscape. Because as we know from not just the Snowden revelations, but also the work from multiple organizations, there's a ton of risk, or there's a ton of possibility for information to be exposed to potentially harmful eyes, or dangerous eyes. But not everything, I think, is about, as I said at the beginning, not everything is about today, and not everything is about direct harm. An example of this is what has been going on for several years with the Belfast Project. The Belfast Project, and again, this is not a topic where I'm a particular expert, but I think it's a good example to show how is that we need to think about the protection of data over time. The Belfast Project, as I understand, is a project that was originated in the Irish Studies program of Boston College, or Boston University, and I may be wrong about the school behind. It's about Boston College, I'm sorry. And one of the things that is interesting about this project is that during the last decade was able to interview several people that were active members of any of the parties involved in what the Irish nation calls the Troubles, you know, the years of violence between multiple parties in Ireland. And in the context of these interviews, the researchers offer some of the interviewees the possibility to give their testimony against a promise to protect their data until, as I understood, until they were deceased. Basically saying that, you know, they were able to preserve that information, and that this information would not be revealed until, you know, they were dead. And this is an important thing, because this was done in the times where encryption was not as common as today, where probably the means of recording this information were a bit more archaic, probably tapes, probably MP3 cassettes, I'm sorry, probably just traditional cassettes. But one of the things that happened is that that project that was originally just an academic project started to become increasingly more political. And in particular, a few years ago, the UK government, through a particular arrangement, a legal arrangement that has with multiple countries, including the States, asked the US government to subpoena Boston College for those records. And this is something that we speculate was around, you know, Jerry Adams, one of the leaders of Sinn Féin, to, you know, validate that he had or had not involvement in some of the disappearance and executions, or in the violence overall. And the thing that is interesting about this is that, you know, when, and again, I'm taking certain licenses because I'm not an expert on the particular topic, but my sense is that the researchers back in the day, you know, offer, you know, in something that seemed to be just an academic project, to record sensitive information against a promise. But they didn't really have any technical means to preserve this information in a way that they could uphold the promise of privacy. And they were left, you know, with the general ethical management of information in universities, as well with legal instruments, right? This is a particular sensitive case in a particularly strong institution. You know, it's an institution that has the ability to fight, you know, with legal means a potential subpoena, which is an ability that many of us will not have over time. So I'm bringing this example for us to think that there's many other ways that information about vulnerable populations, you know, or vulnerable individuals, you know, may be asked to be disclosed. Not just technical means, not just by direct physical violence, not just during today.
And Enrique, that really speaks to the discussion topic that we'll actually have a Google Hangout about tomorrow on when and where does human rights documentation happen, because this is such a great example of how this kind of information is being collected by so many different types of institutions and organizations for many different reasons. And what does that mean for the human rights field and for security?
Yeah, and just to keep banging that drum a little bit, this is what I think that we need to consider, that secure documentation is important. You know, it's not just that we need to preserve or promote the safety of the individuals that collect, is that we need to understand that our responsibility to preserve the data of vulnerable populations need to be designed as responsibility that may need to be actioned over time, right? It's not just the today. At some point, the information that we are collecting is going to be transferred to other that is not going to have the same ability that we may have to either understand the issue or to protect the data. So when we start to collect information, collecting it securely, for example, using encryption, allows us to potentially have a better management around the chain of custody of the information and limit the ways that this information may need to be disclosed. May be disclosed, I'm sorry.
So when we think about keeping this information secure over time, what are some of the key questions that have come up for you, Enrique, and others that you want to dive into in this discussion on the website? What are some of the topics that you would really like to see discussed around this? Or things that you're struggling with still?
So I'll say one more thing, and then I would like to just let Carolina and Chris also dive into this. But I would say that I would be very interested in hearing how is that others are designing their documentation process, how others are considering security, not just in terms of the security of their computers, but how is that they're thinking that in the long-term and complex flow of information, information may be playing a role. From the preservation angle, how is that some of them are planning to preserve their information, to how is that they're thinking that they could protect some of their identities, how is that they're potentially managing access to large amount of information. So I'm very curious about how is that this is being taken into consideration at the design moment of a project.
Chris, do you have anything that you wanted to add? Or Carolina, we just have a few minutes left, so if you have anything that you wanted to share or any questions that you would really like to see discussed in our online forum, please go ahead and share those now.
I was interested in now different ways to be safe information online, or discuss about use several tools when we are talking using sensitive information like the internet, or I don't know, inclusive the Gmail stuff or something like that. How is really safety or not, or what kind of tools they are using for that? Because in my case, for example, we work together in two places, physical places, and we have to share information. In security, it's too crucial for that, but sometimes it's more easy to use internet, email, or something like that. But it's not necessarily more security.
Yeah, I think that's really at the heart of a lot of the challenges that human rights practitioners are facing, is the convenience versus the security.
Yeah.
Yes.
Carolina, I just wanted to mention that tomorrow I think we will really explore further in our Google Hangouts what tools are available and how we can improve the security of documentation efforts. So hopefully you can join us for that one too. And then on Friday we'll be talking about effective and safe collaborative documentation and information sharing. So I hope you can join us for that one too.
Yes.
Chris, any last thoughts, questions? If you're talking, we can't hear you. You may have muted yourself. Chris, anything to add? If not, we'll just expect to hear from you in the discussion on the website. Enrique, any other last points that you wanted to add before we end this hangout?
I will basically, I would like to find a way to, collect as much as possible from the people that have great experience like Carolina, any counterpoint to some of the things that we're going to be discussing. I think that some of us, or at least some of my colleagues, tend to work in a more theoretical world, in the world of the abstract. So I think it's very important for us to hear from people that are working in, in national projects that are grounded in events that are local, so we can, learn from those experiences what are the best directions to, for those that are developing tools, to move forward. What is that we need to be thinking are in terms of like the needs of the human rights field around documentation.
Definitely. So I hope we can explore that more on the website. If there isn't anything else that you all wanted to add, I think I'll just go ahead and wrap it up here.
Great.
Okay, all right. So that's the end of this hangout, but we'll be hosting another one tomorrow at the same time, and then again on Thursday and Friday. And tomorrow we're going to be discussing where and when does documentation happen, and how can we make it more secure? And I invite you all and everybody out there who's watching and listening to this to join us on the New Tactics website to add your comments and questions to the discussion with a community of human rights practitioners. So please join us there, and I look forward to speaking with all of you there. Thanks so much for joining us. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Until tomorrow. Bye.
Thanks, Carolina. Thanks, everyone. Bye.